There's an old saying in journalism, if one person tells you it's raining and another tells you it's not, you're not supposed to report both sides. You're supposed to look outside and see for yourself. I'm afraid times have changed. Nowadays, journalists see what they want to see. Just look at the recent riots in France. We showed you the pictures on Monday. There were vehicles burning on the streets, police officers chasing and arresting protesters. It was clearly evidence of long-running problems in France, like racism or the backlash against immigration. But Western media did not see it that way. Look at this article in Politico. It's called "The Politics of the French Riots." In fact, let me read out what it says. This is largely an insurrection without aims. The riots are, in a sense, anti-France. Thank God it wasn't in India or Bangladesh or South Africa, because then the riots would have been pro-democracy. Next, we have the Washington Post. They say the protests will create an opening for the far right. How about that? These people were outraged by systemic racism. They were fed up of being treated as second-class citizens, but when they protest, they're accused of helping the far right. Classy from the folks at Washington Post. Guardian also had a problematic take. Look at their headline. A grim tale of the growing gulf between haves and have-nots. They're calling it a class war. Maybe there is a class element to it. But shooting a 17-year-old at point blank is not just a class problem, it's a race problem. This was targeted racism. Guardian had no problem using such language about India. Look at their report on the Delhi riots. And let me quote that for you. The violence in Delhi is not a riot, it's targeted anti-Muslim brutality. I have more examples for you. The New York Times is calling this a new challenge for Macron. They're not blaming his policies for it, they're simply calling it a challenge. Wall Street Journal is not even concerned about the protests, they're worried about the French cops. Look at two of their reports. French riots test Macron's loyalty to police, as if that's the bigger issue here. Another headline says, behind the riots lie years of anger over police conduct. So it's not systemic racism, it's not anti-immigration sentiments either, it's all about police conduct. The New York Times has said the same thing. French police won authority to shoot at drivers but got no training whatsoever. Do you really need training for that? Not shooting 17-year-olds comes naturally to most people. I guess in France you have to be taught. Now compare this to how they cover Indian police. Look at the same New York Times during the Delhi riots, and I'm quoting, how Delhi's police turned against Muslims. A few anecdotes, a handful of statements, and job done. The NYT published a smear piece on Delhi police, but in France it's all about the lack of training. You can understand what the strategy is here. Don't blame the leader, don't blame the institutions, instead blame complex issues like class and history. But elsewhere it's the opposite. Let me also show you another set of headlines. This is from Le Monde. It's a French newspaper. India's Modi fails to respond to an outpouring of hatred against Muslims. They're going straight after the head of government. Now look at their coverage of Macron. Riots in France, Macron bases three-stage response on empathy, firmness, and a moral jolt. I guess arresting 3,000 people is empathy. And so is suggesting that social media should be limited. The fact is, social media can inflame such situations. But when other governments do it, it is draconian. When Macron does it, it's a moral jolt, whatever that means. And it's not just India. The Western media does it with most Asian and African leaders. Look at Politico's headline on Bangladesh. Does Bangladesh's Prime Minister still believe in democracy? Again, a direct attack on the head of government. A couple of reports questioned the arrest of government critics, so Politico ran this headline. And we're not saying it's a bad headline. We're saying do the same for France. The Western media has been handling France with kid gloves. No explosive headlines, no incisive editorials. It's all been rather nice and polite. The New York Times even ran this informative report. Traveling to France, here's what you need to know about the protests. Such coverage comes from inherent racism. Any unrest in the West is an anomaly for them. But any unrest in Asia or Africa is the norm, and most likely the government's doing. The result of state-sanctioned oppression, as they put it. It's almost 500 days since Russia invaded Ukraine. War fatigue has truly set in. Drone strikes don't shock people anymore, neither do multi-billion-dollar arms packages. It's all become routine. But one thing still forces world leaders to sit up and take notice. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Here it is on the map. It is located in southern Ukraine. It is the largest nuclear plant in Europe, but right now it's under Russian control. Their soldiers captured the power plant around 16 months back. Since then, we have heard warnings after warnings. Russia will blow up the reactors, Russia will cut off water supply, Russia will sabotage the facility, but none of it has actually happened. On Tuesday, President Zelensky issued another warning. He says Russia has placed explosives on the roof of Zaporizhzhia. Listen to this.
Now we have information from our intelligence that the Russian military has placed objects similar to explosives on the roof of several power units of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. It's probable they needed to simulate an attack on the plant, or they could have some other kind of scenario.
And what is Russia saying? The very opposite. They claim Ukraine is planning to drop ammunition on Zaporizhzhia. But here's the thing about both these claims. A, there is no evidence. And B, we've heard too many of them before. In August last year, Zelensky warned of a nuclear catastrophe. He said Russia was using nuclear blackmail. In November, he warned of sabotage. The Ukrainian president urged NATO to protect the power plant. In March this year, he said Zaporizhzhia was being held hostage. Again, sort of blackmail. And in June, the president again warned of sabotage. These are just some of the major instances. Zaporizhzhia always figures in Zelensky's speeches and statements, and every time Russia has responded in the same manner. They've turned around and accused Ukraine. So what are both sides up to? In August and November last year, there was a real threat. We saw some nearby installations being shelled. Even the United Nations atomic watchdog was spooked. But since then, it's been tough to decode. The power plant itself has been disconnected. It's not plugged into Ukraine's national grid anymore. Plus, attacking Zaporizhzhia would make no strategic sense. You would open yourself up to global condemnation. You would also douse 1 million people in radiation. So logic says, do not attack. But warning of an attack is different. Both sides have accused each other of plotting attacks on Zaporizhzhia. Ukraine has used it to rally support. The UN atomic watchdog sided with them. The agency's chief has visited Zaporizhzhia thrice. And he called for Russia to hand over control to Ukraine. Even the government of India was sympathetic. Prime Minister Modi spoke to Zelensky about the nuclear threat. He said endangering such facilities would be catastrophic. So could this be a case of Ukraine crying wolf? Of trying to build pressure on Russia? Well, that's one possibility. Having said that, you cannot dispute one fact. It was Russia who attacked the plant first. Until March last year, Ukraine controlled the Zaporizhzhia plant. But Russian troops fought their way to capture it. So clearly, the Kremlin was interested in it. They wanted to control this high-value, high-risk target. The question is why? For starters, around 50% of Ukraine's power is nuclear. Zaporizhzhia used to produce around 6,000 megawatts. If you control this plant, you can turn off the lights. Perhaps that's one reason. Another possibility is to weaponize fear. If there is an accident, the Ukrainian army will have to mop up. It's their people who would be affected. Keeping that threat alive is useful for Moscow. But these are just possibilities and theories. So let's focus on what we do know. There have been dozens of warnings, but none of them have materialized. Does that mean we should just ignore it? Well, that's the trouble. How do you ignore a nuclear plant in the middle of a war zone? Both sides know it's impossible. It doesn't have to be a planned attack or sabotage. It can be unintended, like a wayward missile cutting off electricity to the plant, or fatigue and mental issues of the local staff. That is even more likely and dangerous. Just yesterday, there were more drone strikes on Ukraine. Around 43 people were injured in the Kharkiv region. Kiev says there is a counter-offensive underway. But from the looks of it, the front lines are frozen. A couple of months from now, winter will set in, which means the front lines will actually freeze over. So the biggest threat to Zaporizhzhia is not some calculated and devious strike. It's A, an unintended disaster, and B, desperation. If you're desperate enough, you will forget logic. You will even attack a nuclear plant and blame it on the other side. The question is, who will reach that point first? Yesterday, we told you about the SCO summit. Prime Minister Modi hosted it. Leaders from China, Pakistan and Russia were in attendance. At the end of it, they released a joint statement. It's called the New Delhi Declaration. But looks like New Delhi is not too happy about it, or at least parts of it. There was one obvious elephant in the room, the differences between India and China. Now, there are differences with Pakistan as well, but let's stick to the members that matter. The joint statement reaffirmed support for China's Belt and Road Initiative. But one country stayed away, and that country was India. Take a look at the statement. This is what it says. Reaffirming their support for China's BRI initiative, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, Russia, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan note the ongoing work to jointly implement this project. All members except India supported it. And there's nothing new about this position. India has never supported China's Belt and Road Initiative. One, because it undercuts India's position in the region, and two, because it violates India's sovereignty. You see, the BRI has multiple projects in Pakistan. It's called the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Some of those projects are in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, so naturally, India does not support it. Prime Minister Modi made that position clear in his opening remarks. He said connectivity cannot violate territorial integrity. Listen to this.
किसी भी क्षेत्र की प्रगति के लिए मजबूत कनेक्टिविटी का होना बहुत ही आवश्यक है। बेहतर कनेक्टिविटी आपसी व्यापार ही नहीं, आपसी विश्वास भी बढ़ाती है। किंतु इन प्रयासों में एससीओ चार्टर के मूल सिद्धांतों, विशेष रूप से सदस्य देशों की संप्रभुता और क्षेत्रीय अखंडता का सम्मान करना बहुत ही आवश्यक है।
Now, Belt and Road is not just any other project. It is Xi Jinping's favorite project, his grand plan to dominate the world. In 2017, he organized the first Belt and Road Forum. It was planned meticulously. Around 30 heads of state and government flew in. So did top bosses of the World Bank, the IMF, and the World Trade Organization. It was Xi Jinping's moment to shine. But guess who boycotted that meeting? India. New Delhi's absence was a big setback to Xi Jinping, and the very next month, Doklam happened. China began deploying soldiers and equipment at the tri-junction between India, China and Bhutan. The standoff lasted more than 2 months. Many say it was payback for India's Belt and Road snub. The standoff ended ahead of the BRICS summit in China. There was speculation that Prime Minister Modi could skip. So Beijing agreed to defuse the situation. But in 2020, there was another escalation, the one in the Galwan Valley. The standoff is yet to be diffused, the one in Galwan. But there was a repeat of 2017 last year. In September, China agreed to disengage from certain points in Ladakh. Not all of them, but some of them. Days later, the SCO summit took place in Uzbekistan. Prime Minister Modi came face to face with President Xi Jinping. And my point is this: China is very invested in the Belt and Road, and it's willing to use every trick in the book to get India on board. Force, diplomacy, trickery, especially in the current situation. The BRI has lost steam since the Wuhan virus pandemic. The investments have stalled. The projects have been delayed. So some countries are even looking to leave the forum. Countries like Italy. Their new government is all set to quit the BRI. So China needs to inject momentum into Xi's pet project. But if they're betting on India, it's a useless bet. We told you how New Delhi refused to support BRI in the joint statement, but that was not the only difference of opinion. The SCO also came up with a development strategy for 2030. Once again, India did not sign on. Why? Because it was riddled with Chinese agenda. I'll give you examples. It talked about the Global Development Initiative. It was proposed by Xi Jinping in 2021. India decided not to support that document. Look at what the New Delhi Declaration says about it. The SCO considers it important to ensure the implementation of the Economic Development Strategy 2030 adopted by interested member states. Not all member states, interested member states. All of this signals the friction within the SCO. At the same time, it shows why India must hang on to it. If the joint statement looks like this, when India is the president, imagine what it will look like without India on board. Probably like the Xi Jinping thought. So India's presence in the SCO is not about aiming high, it's about limiting China's march into Central Asia. Yesterday's summit and joint statement reflect that attitude. Our next story is from China, and it's a story that writes itself. Look at the pictures. This is what parts of China look like. What you see right now is Chongqing in central China. It has seen very heavy rainfall in the last few days. At least 15 people have died. Some others are still missing. The streets are inundated. Cars have been submerged. Rainwater mixed with mud has painted the streets brown. Several counties in this region have issued red alerts. This is one of the worst affected areas in China. Look at this video. It shows rain causing a building to crumble. These images came out yesterday. The day before that, another dramatic video emerged. It shows a couple being rescued. This was from China's Henan province. Rains are battering almost every part of the country. They're causing heavy losses. Some 10,000 people have been rescued from this area, the central Hunan province. Dozens of buildings have collapsed. Initial estimates peg the damage at $80 million, 80 million, and the worst may be yet to come. In the Sichuan province, more than 85,000 people have been displaced. President Xi Jinping has called on local authorities to step up to make stronger efforts to protect lives and property from severe flooding. The Chinese government has also announced emergency funds, some $44 million for disaster relief. But that may not be enough, because the crisis spans large parts of the country. And it's not just the heavy rains. While most of China is inundated, some areas in the north are facing extreme heat. And some places like Shanghai are suffering both rain and heat. Authorities have issued an orange heat alert for Shanghai. The temperature could go up to 37 degrees, which may not sound too extreme for us here in India, but for the Chinese it is a lot. They've already seen 4 regional heat waves this summer, also recorded the highest ever number of hot days over 6 months. And hot days are when temperatures cross 35 degrees Celsius. And Beijing is among the worst hit. Chinese Met authorities have issued a warning. They say the country can expect multiple natural disasters in July. Those were the words they used, multiple natural disasters. This includes floods, typhoons, and high temperatures. And this will take a toll on more than just people. China's agricultural sector will also be gravely affected by what's happening. In fact, that has already begun. The rains have disrupted wheat harvests. The kernels are turning black and unfit for consumption. Officials say this is the worst setback for the wheat harvest in a decade. Meanwhile, the heat has led to the death of fish in rice paddies where they're cultivated. Hundreds of pigs have also died due to the heat. It's been so bad that authorities have had to splash water on pigs being transported to prevent heat strokes. So both grain and meat production has been hit by the extreme weather, and this will affect China's food security. Remember, food security is central to Xi Jinping's policies. He's been trying to make China completely self-sufficient in food, so much so that he's been accused of hoarding food during the pandemic. But repeated climate disasters are denting his plans, because this is not the first such flood. Of late, China has been seeing heavy rains and extreme weather every summer. You may remember this from 2021. More than 300 people died in floods in just the central province of Henan. So extreme weather is becoming more frequent and damaging. 20 cities in China have been flooded this week. 11 of the 31 provinces in the country are bracing for more heavy rains. Experts say there's more disruption and destruction in store. Money has long been an inspiration for many artists. Pink Floyd called it the root of all evil. Wu-Tang Clan rapped, "Cash rules everything around me." But superstars aren't just happy with singing about money or making money by singing. They strive for more. Sometimes they move economies with their vocal cords. And the biggest example of this is Taylor Swift, the iconic American singer. She's one of the highest paid entertainers in the world, and she is on a world tour right now, the Eras Tour. It is set to earn a record $1 billion in ticket sales. And if you think this is a big number, well, think again, because this is just the ticket revenue. Concerts make money in many ways. People spend on merchandise, accommodation, travel, and Swifties, or the fans of Taylor Swift, spend about $1,300 on average. So if you add everything, her tour could generate $5 billion. That's right, $5 billion. That's more than the GDP of many countries. And this may be the best case scenario, artists helping with economic growth. In some cases, they also push up inflation. Last month, we saw this in Sweden. The American star singer Beyoncé kicked off her world tour in Sweden in the month of May. It caused a huge influx of visitors. Hotel and restaurant prices suddenly rose, and the result was this: Sweden's inflation surged. They called it Bayflation. It sounds bizarre, but Bayflation and the swift lift are only part of the norm, which brings us to something called the concert economy. It means exactly what it sounds like. It tells us how concerts affect economic growth and inflation, and it is seen across the world because artists are so much more than just singers and songwriters. They are an economic phenomenon, an obsession, an industry unto themselves sometimes. So their hugely lucrative tours benefit economies. And don't be mistaken, this is not a new concept, a new trend. In 1964, the Beatles practically rescued the British economy. The UK had a negative balance between imports and exports. Then the Beatles went on tour. They earned income in dollars, the Deutsche Mark, and the yen. Thanks to international ticket sales, royalties, and even appearance fees, and the British economy got a boost. You see, the concert economy is all about exporting music. Exhibit A, K-pop. It has become a global phenomenon, and now it contributes $10 billion to the South Korean economy. Boy band BTS alone accounts for about $4 billion. And exporting music is especially great for smaller economies. Sweden literally awarded ABBA for their contribution to the country's exports. And many say U2 was one of Ireland's top 3 exports in the 90s. And as we speak, it's the summer of concerts. Beyoncé and Bruce Springsteen are reigning over Europe. Taylor Swift has taken over the US and Australia. In some parts of the world, it seems like everyone is going to a concert. But if you're elsewhere, like in some African or Asian nations, you're probably suffering from serious FOMO. So why don't global music stars tour certain countries as much? There are multiple reasons, like the lack of great venues. Experts say every major European and American city has a minimum 50 venues for performances. This is where artists can just plug in and play. In countries like India, that is not the case. So when artists come here, they have to bring their own high-tech gear. And then there are other reasons, like high promoter costs, red tapeism from government authorities, and the lack of a large fan base. But to many fans, these factors don't really matter because those who can will travel far and wide to attend these concerts.
They were really expensive. They were like 5,000 reais. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And the plane tickets after that, because, well, I had the ticket, so I had to get there. The plane tickets cost about 6,000.
I actually didn't get the ticket. My friends did because there were like 30,000 people in the queue for Edinburgh. So it was kind of a team effort. So we got the tickets. They were incredibly expensive, but I was willing to pay for it. I was willing to travel 6 hours plus on a train to get there.
Fact of the matter, money is funny in this rich man's world. But even in this material world, music hails supreme, it seems. And crowd-pulling concerts often pull up entire economies too. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Yesterday we showed you a Japanese sea turning red. Today we bring you visuals of a Japanese river turning lime green. No one knows what happened and why this happened. But an investigation is underway. On a Florida beach, swimmers got a surprise guest, a shark. It was captured on camera swimming alongside beachgoers. In India's Nagaland, giant boulders crushed cars after a landslide, killing 2 people. The horrific footage was captured on a car's dash cam. And finally, what makes the 5th of July significant? We're taking you back in history to the year 1977, to Pakistan's Black Day, when General Zia-ul-Haq raised a coup. He seized power from President Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, leading to 11 years of martial law in the country. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.